Alright guys, welcome back to my channel once again. As we all know, we are treating the introduction to Adobe Photoshop, and we've done 3 videos so far. This is the 4th video, and this video entirely is going to be theoretical, even though some aspect of practice will be in it, but this is an aspect that most designers actually overlook. There's the elements and principles of design. You need to understand this and understand it very, very well to be able to implement them in your designs and have it make sense in some way or the other. Because when you're designing something, it's sending across, you're communicating a message. So at the end of the day, if that message is not met, or the viewer is not able to get that message, then that means the design was wrong in the first place. So there are certain elements and principles of design that every designer needs to be aware of and be cognizant of during your design projects. So we'll start with the elements of design, and after we'll go into the principles of design. So, but before I go in there, thank you very much for the support, the likes, the comments on the videos. I really appreciate it, and let's keep the energy going. Thank you very much. All right, so when we say elements of design, we have a couple of them. We have a lot, but generally to surround the elements will involve line, shape, form, space, color, value, and texture. So we're going to take each one of them and try to explain them so you understand. All right, now when you take the aspect of design, the elements of design are the aspects of when you take any design, what makes up the design is what we refer to as the element of design. So when you take any design out there, you have the line, you have shapes, you have forms, you have space, you have color, and so on and so forth. So lines are the most basic element of the design. They come in all shapes and sizes and colors. So this line, the black line you have at the top here, or the dotted lines, or the dashed line, or the curved lines, you can come in any shape, as you can see on the screen here. And also the colors or the sizes can increase. The width of this line can increase as much as you want it to be. Right, so lines have direction. They can be visible or invisible and can help direct the eye to a specific spot. So when you're designing something and you want focus to be on a particular element or on a particular aspect of design, you can use lines to direct the viewer's eye focus. You use lines for that purpose and any other purpose as well. So lines can be used to create demarcations of a specific section. So when you take any design, most of the times they are in sections. You have maybe the headlines at one side, the pictures. Most of the times in magazine, you have a spot where there are only pictures. So that is a demarcation of a design. So most of the elements in a particular area will have the similar line or similar shapes to it. Straight lines mostly communicate steadiness when it comes to design, but curved lines also, one way or the other, communicate dynamism. So depending on how you use it, you can apply the elements of design in terms of line. Now we go to the next one, with the shape. Shapes are mostly the result of enclosed lines. So you have lines and you enclose them. In this case, you have a square, a rectangle, triangle, and also a circle. These are enclosed lines, and when you close lines together, you tend to create shapes. The shapes can be 1D, 2D, or 3D. I'm not going to go much into it, but these are flat surfaces. So shapes can come in different forms. The two forms we have here, this is a geometric shape, and here we have an abstract shape. Difference between the geometric shapes, they have structures and often mathematical and precise. So like the example, you have your square, rectangle, triangle, and circle. They are very precise, they are mathematical in nature. Now when it comes to the other one, which is abstract shapes are minimalistic representation of reality. So like example, a stick figure of a human being, or you drawing a sun, or imitating waves at the seaside, and so on and so forth. So those are shapes, and you implement and you apply those to the designs you have. And the next element of design is what we refer to as form, and its direct opposite is space, which we'll be discussing. So form also refers to as positive space. So form is a positive element of a space. So in this case, the element we are using here is square. So let's assume this is our canvas, this is our design, and the only element in there is the circle. What it means is that the circle is our form, and any other part of the canvas where there is no element is referred to as space. So negative space and then positive space. So form, it can be a dot, it can be a line or a shape in a form placed on a canvas, whereas space or negative space is the area surrounding a shape. So you have a circle here, and the area surrounding the circle, which doesn't have any element to it, is what we refer to as the negative space. So they complement each other. Anytime you place an element onto a dashboard, onto a canvas, it creates what you call a form, and its surrounding areas where there's no element is what we refer to as space or negative space. Now when you are designing and you don't have a lot of negative space, that means you don't have a lot of breathing area. It can result in a cluttered design. So let's say you have circles and you try to combine all of them at one space, at one area. You tend to clutter your design. So in as much as you want to have elements within your canvas, you have to be very careful of their spacing. So form and shapes are very important when it comes to design. Now the next is color, which is very self-explanatory, but we'll go a little bit into it. So colors are applied to any element. So the elements we've discussed earlier, that's the line, shape, form, and space. All of these have attributes of color to it. Now colors are applied to all these elements, and colors create moods. So every color has a mood that it creates. You have kind of, maybe let's say yellow represents brightness or youthful exuberance, red represents danger, so on and so forth. So every color has a particular mood it represents when it comes to design. So depending on the design and depending on the end result you want to get, you can apply the particular color. If you are designing something which is high end, which is supposed to be for adults, you don't play with a lot of colors, you don't implement a lot of colors, because the design tends to become very childish when there's a lot of colors. You have to be careful on what colors to use and how many colors to use when you are designing. Now when it comes to colors, there are certain characteristics that you have to be aware of as a designer. So there's a hue of a color, there's a shade, there's tint, and there's tone. I'm going to brush through it, saying this is a beginner course. Now the hue is the color itself. So in this case, the blue. So let's try to when you open the color picker. Now the blue, the top color is where you have the color in its purest form. As you go down, then you are going to the darker shade of that color. That's what you refer to as a shade. So the more dark, the more black you add to a color, that means you are increasing the shade of the color. Now the opposite of when you're adding black is referred to as shade. When you're adding white to a color, it refers to as tint. You are tinting the color. So when you are getting closer to white, it means you are tinting the color. So you get to white and then your color disappears. And then in between the white and the black, we have gray. That means you are toning the color. When you are going towards the gray color, we are toning it. Now from its main color, that's the hue, throughout, and we are adding more colors to the hue of a color. It means you are desaturating it. So the color in its purest form is a saturated color. When you add black, when you add white, and you add gray, you are desaturating the color. So these are things that you have to be aware of, and you need to use them in your designs. And the next element you have is what you refer to as value. Now value refers to the lightness or darkness of a specific hue. Now we all know hue refers to the purest form of a color. So if you have yellow, its purest form of yellow is the hue of yellow. The purest form of the purest form of blue is the hue of blue. Now when you add where the lightness of darkness to a specific hue is what you refer to as value. So the higher the value, that means the color is in its very purest form. The lower the value. So this is a low value and this is a high value. So the higher the value, that means the color is in its purest form, and the lower the value, that means it's losing its purity when it comes to the color and it's going towards white. Now value creates contrast when it comes to design. So two colors placed together close to one another would contrast and be visible to the eye if they are different in values. So you don't have a black background and you tend to write your text with another dark background. There's no contrast. At the end of the day, the viewer is not able to read what you are writing. A perfect example of value in terms of contrast is writing the text white and background black, or the background is white and the text is white. This is a very perfect example when it comes to value. Now the last of the elements is what referred to as a texture. So imagine you see a design and you can touch it. How you feel the design is what referred to as texture. Texture adds depth to a surface and it gives a different vibration. So depending on the design, you can have different textures to it. Now texture can be put together by adding lines and shapes like we have here. So these are dots, these are diagonal lines, these are dashed lines but in a diagonal form. All this represents form of texture. I would encourage you to read more about texture and understand it much fully. Alright, so like I said earlier, so a recap, so we have lines when it comes to elements of design. Lines, you have shapes, you have form, and the negative space, you have space. The negative form of form is space, and then color, value, and then texture. So as a designer, you have to start knowing what all of this means: the hue of a color, the tint of a color, the shade of a color, the tone of the color, and so on and so forth. So those are the elements of design. Now the next aspect of today's lesson is the design principles. We have a number of design principles. They include balance, unity, contrast, emphasis, repetition, pattern, rhythm, movement, proportion, variety, harmony, and so on and so forth. Other books will add more to this list, but I'm going to take 5 of these and then explain it, and I'll encourage you to go and then read more on the rest, because these principles and elements are what makes up a design. If you don't understand this, you tend to design stuff, and then the aim or the reason for the design or the communication is not meant. That means it's cost 90. At the end of the day, you've designed something and it's not meeting the purpose, it's not meeting the reason why it was designed. So you design a flyer, and then at the end of the day, you are not getting the response you are getting because you didn't apply elements and especially the principles of design. Now, I'm going to be explaining proportion, emphasis, contrast, unity, and balance. So the first one, that's the balance. When it comes to balance of a design, all elements on a design carry a visual weight. So a square, a circle, a line, dot, all of them carry a visual weight. When the viewer is looking at design, it carries a certain weight to the eye. So you have to be aware of this. 2, a design with the same visual weight on opposite sides are referred to as symmetrical. So if you have a design and throughout the design you have on opposite sides, you have the same elements, you have the same shape, size, or form at both ends, is what you refer to as symmetrical. And the opposite of symmetrical is asymmetrical, where you have designs that have different weights. It can be in the form of the color, it can be in the form of the shape, it can be in the form of the lines, and so on and so forth. All this will create balance depending on how well you use them in a design. So the lack of balance, if you don't balance your design well, you end up having a design having on one side is very heavy and on another side is very light, which is very disturbing to the viewer. So you have to be aware of the design you are doing. You have to be aware of your audience, and you know what type of balance you are looking for in a design. Now the next element or the next principle of design you have is what you refer to as unity. Now the unity is primarily or basically creating harmony when it comes to design, creating harmony in respect to the design element. Now using similar colors will appear as if the design was well put together. So if you open any document or any design from any brand and you see there's a consistency of colors, you tend to appreciate that they were placed there for a particular purpose, and they are not just placed there for any reason or any how. They are placed there for a particular reason. Now unity provides clear order and prevents elements from fighting for attention. If you have a design and you are very aware of unity, the elements that have to draw attention, you give them a particular set of attributes so that they call for more attention, and the other elements that you don't want much attention, you create some kind of unity amongst themselves. If you don't have the unity in the design tend to be very distractive. The attention goes to where it's not supposed to go to, and so on and so forth. So like I said, the lack of unity in terms of design will end up making the design very cluttered, very shambolic, and so on and so forth. You have to be very aware when you are designing your flyers, you are designing any artwork whatsoever. Now the next principle of design I'll be touching on is what's referred to as the contrast. Now contrast is the level of difference between design elements in order to create visual hierarchy, and the difference here can be in terms of color. Like you have here, one shape has a different color, the other shape has a different color. The contrast can also be in terms of the size. The contrast can also be in terms of shape. This square, this circle. So you are creating contrast. That means you don't want the elements that have to look different look the same. So if there are two elements in a design, let's say that we have a heading and an image, they don't need to have the same elements. One has to be bigger than the other, or one has to have a different color, or one has to be in a different shape, so that there's some kind of contrast, there's some kind of difference between those two elements. Contrast allows for creation of focal points. So when you design elements and you put in contrast, you are either pulling attention to one element in comparison to the other. So lack of contrast will result in making a design very dull. If all your elements are the same, they are all the same color, they are all the same size, they are all the same shape, which part of the design do you wish the viewer or the viewer to pay attention to? So in one way or the other, as a designer, whilst you are designing, you are also paying attention to which part of your design do you want your viewer or the person who comes in contact with your design to pay much attention to. You direct the eye of the user. As a designer, you direct the eye of the user. You don't just put in any design element anyhow and expect the viewer to be able to read. So let's say you are designing a flyer for an event, and then the name of the event itself is very small in size, the color is very dull, and the shapes surrounding it are not appealing at all, and it's somewhere at the corner of the design. How do you expect the viewer to be able to read and know that, oh, this is the event I'm talking about? So when you're designing, you have to pay much attention to contrast and differentiate elements that you want to pay the viewer to pay much attention to, as compared to other elements that are equally important but not so important when it comes to the overall design structure. And the next element is the next principle is what referred to as emphasis. Now, emphasis is a strategy to get viewers' attention to a specific design. So like I've been saying earlier on, it's all about designing the focus of the viewer. You design in a way that you are controlling which aspects of the artwork should the reader or the viewer go to first. It doesn't mean all the elements are not important, but you are pulling attention to one element as compared to the others. So create a standout element so it stands tall amongst all the other elements. So like the example I just gave, you are organizing an event, you are creating a flyer. The name of the flyer has to call for attention, or the people that are going to speak or the guest of honor for that event have to call for attention. You can't create a flyer and the name of the flyer, the date, the venue, and the dignitaries that are going to be speaking at the event are very small at one corner of the design, and your focus is lost, and the communication at the end of the day is not meant. You design a flyer and then the end result is very poor because of the lack of design principles. Now, emphasis can be done with lines, shapes, color, and space. In this example, you have all elements here. You have 4 elements here, and all of them are square. But you want to focus attention on one, so you give it a different color, or you give it a different shape, or you give it a different form altogether to draw attention to it. Now the last principle I'll be explaining is what referred to as proportion. Proportion basically is how elements in composition or in a design relate well with each other. So this is like a direct reflection on what is real we are designing. So let's say you are designing something that includes some aspects of reality, like houses, trees, cars. You have to be mindful of the ratio. You don't have like houses that are very small as compared to a car. In reality, you know that certain houses are in general bigger than most cars you have out there. So you don't go to your design space and go and design whereas the car is very big and the house is very small. There are instances where that is done, but those are design disruptive. Those are designs that have a reason why that is done, and it draws for attention. If you are not very careful and you don't know how to able to balance your design very well, you end up having a very immature design. Now, when two elements are compared, it is important for the elements to look realistic. Like I said earlier, it has to be very realistic. You don't have a design where your design has, let's say, an ant and a human being, and at the end of the day, the ant is very huge as compared to the human. In reality, that is not the case. But like I said, there are instances where those types of design are done, and it has a different focus, it has a different purpose as to why that is done. But in most cases, you have to be very aware of proportion when it comes to design. Lack of proportion will disrupt the whole outlook of the design. So like I explained earlier, so you have balance, unity, contrast, emphasis, and proportion, and those are the elements of design. There are a number of them, so you have to, there's repetition, there's pattern, there's rhythm to a design, movement basically you directing the viewer from one element to another. There's proportion, variety, and harmony. All these make up the principles of design. Now, the elements and principles of art and design are the foundation of creation and composition. Every designer out there has to be aware of these elements and the principles. When you don't have them, you tend to design, at the end of the day, your reason for designing is not met, and then it becomes back to cost 90 basically. So that's zero. Now, the use of this element can give structure and will help your design with purpose by giving the function to every single element. Every element you add to your design has to have a reason why it is there. You bring in a text. Why are you bringing a text? You bring in a shape. Why is the shape there? You include a line. Why is the line there? You bring a pattern. You bring a texture. As a designer, you should be able to explain each of these elements and why you place them and why it is at a particular place and not another place, or why it is in this size or not this, or why it's bigger or smaller. All this you have to be able to justify why that is. Communicating a clear message isn't only about the message, but how we carry it to deliver it cleanly and clearly. So if you've not gotten anything out of this session, this last statement, communicating a clear message isn't only about the message, but how we carry it to deliver it cleanly and clearly. So you have the elements and the principle have to balance each other very well, so as to get the communication you are looking for at the end of the day. Now, these are what we refer to as the elements and principles of design, which every designer has to be aware of. And that is not only applied to Photoshop. Any design at all you have out there, Illustrator, Canvas, InDesign, any animation, any design, any design out there, even the hard copied one where people draw images of people and so on and so forth, all these are taken into consideration, the elements and principles of design, because without them you create imbalance in your design. The viewer is not able to read clearly, the purpose of the design is not meant, and then everything becomes shambles, and then the design is very cluttered. So to avoid this, you have to have at the back of your mind the elements and principles of design. Now next week, hopefully, we'll be doing our 5th video, and we'll be applying all what we've learned in the first 3 sessions and these elements and principles of design to come up with certain designs. So what I would like to, if you can comment in the comment section below, what type of design do you want us to create? You want us to create a wedding invitation, a business card, a letterhead, and so on and so forth. Let's get these suggestions, and next week hopefully we'll pick one, and then we will design an artwork from start to finish, implementing all the designs and principles and everything we've learned previously when it comes to Photoshop specific. So thank you once again for joining. So thank you very much once again. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thank you very much.